This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the Xcast. I'm your host, Sarah Blair, and the truth is in here. We're here with Baz Greenland today, and we're going to be talking about the novel, the X-Files tie-in novel, Whirlwind. Hi, Baz. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. This is not the first X-Files book. The first one was Goblins, and it was written by Charles Grant, and this one was published in 1995. So it originally came out April 20th, 1995. And, what are your overall... Let's just get your general overall thoughts on this book.
That's fine. Okay, yeah. So well, it's actually the only book I've actually read. Obviously, I've seen the series many, many times over and talked about it a lot. But I guess to try and sum it up, there are some mysterious murders going on in New Mexico. People essentially being scoured alive, which is pretty nasty. And so Mulder and Scully head down to New Mexico to investigate the murders, discover what's going on, and get caught up in some kind of local, schemes and machinations, and discover this ancient Native American ritual which creates a blood wind, which is kind of psychic whirlwind, which we call it, and that basically attacks people, literally scales them alive, which is pretty nasty, and they have to determine who the killer is and who basically solve the case. All in the heat of New Mexico.
Exactly. So it kind of ties in some Native American stuff. There's a plot line where one of the characters is selling jewelry, and there's a lot going on in this book. So this is the first tie-in novel that you've read. Is that what you said? It is,
yes.
Yeah. So you didn't read them when they came out, originally?
No, I mean, I started watching X-Files from about season 2, very beginning of season 2, back which I know BBC Two over here in the UK. So I kind of followed it all the way through, but I never actually read the books, so I was aware of them. Actually, my wife, I was finishing the book today. My wife, who watched X-Files at the same time, said she actually thought this was her book because she'd actually read that when she was young as well. So, but no, I was aware of the books, but I never actually read them.
I read them all. I think I discovered that they even existed somewhere around probably when Ruins came out, or right before Ruins came out, because that was where I remember. And I read them. I went through and got them and read them all at once. But I don't remember reading them as they actually came out. I think there were 4 or 5 that I read all at once. So, but I do remember reading them way back when. But I didn't remember anything about any of them, hardly. I do remember a little bit about Ruins because it was really vivid. The descriptions were really vivid, and I was really into that one. But this one, I completely forgot everything about, other than it was just the whirlwind thing. I didn't even remember that it was in New Mexico or anything like that. I think maybe in my brain I kind of got Goblins and Whirlwind sort of meshed together a little bit, because there was stuff when I read Goblins for our earlier podcast that I talked about with Tony. There was stuff in there that I thought came from Whirlwind, and stuff from Whirlwind that I thought came from Goblins. So I think I just got them all sort of meshed together in my head. But I looked this up on Goodreads, and out of 1,764 reviews on Goodreads, it had 3.4 out of 5 stars. So we kind of rate the episodes on the Xcast. How would you rate this book out of 10?
Maybe,
and you can separate the writing technique if you want. You can give that a number.
Yeah,
I
guess that's it. I mean, I read a little bit about Charles Grant. I've never read any of Charles Grant's books before, and he's a horror writer. And I guess he's very good. The best thing I get a sense from the book is the atmosphere and the heat and the dust and how uncomfortable everything is. He's very good at doing that. So I think he's very good at setting the atmosphere. So I can imagine his horror stories maybe are quite atmospheric. It's more, but the narrative is just dull. I didn't really care about the characters. It only really gets interesting in the last couple of chapters, and in fact, it takes a quarter of the book before Mulder and Scully even stumble on the case. But I would say 4 out of 10. Maybe I'm being a bit generous there. I think 3 to 4 out of 10 because you really get a sense of the setting and the situation. But maybe that's because it's all tired and hot and uncomfortable, and I just felt tired and uncomfortable reading the book. I don't know, because I've read it twice now. I read it originally a year ago, and when I first spoke to Tony about doing the book for a podcast, and I read it again for now. Yeah, it's just not particularly interesting. I think it's one of those ones that had it been an episode, you would have gone, oh, I remember it, because the deaths are quite nasty. This whole well, it rips up and it scours people, literally shreds their clothing, their skin, and everything around them. It's a very, while they're sort of stood up, it's nasty. And I can imagine if that had been done well, and obviously it's doing with special effects in the 90s, whether it was done well or not, that might have been memorable. But I think it would have been one of those all right episodes, nothing particularly special to write home about. And I think the thing about when you've got a book, you've got no budget restraints, you've got nothing. There's nothing holding you back in a book. So I would have thought that there'd be something a bit more oomph to it. And I don't know, maybe it's something X-Files never particularly did well for me in kind of Native American culture. And I think it falls into the same traps in the novel as well. But it just, as a story, just isn't that particularly interesting. And the characters aren't that particularly interesting either. So I kind of felt that it's a bit of a wasted opportunity in that respect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'd put it probably like 4-ish, 4.5 maybe, to be generous. But I would definitely agree, because I never really got in, and I kind of felt like the goblins suffered the same problem too, because there were so many characters and you never really got to identify and get into the heads of anyone for too long, enough to really, bond with that character or really understand their motivation. And I don't know if you heard the term head hopping, but in writing we use that a lot, where you're just hopping from one person's head to another and there's no real structure as to whose perspective you're getting. And I think it would have benefited to just pick Mulder and Scully, obviously, and then maybe one or two other characters, like one character, like maybe, I guess her name was Anna.
Yeah, Anne Hatch, yes, the lead actress, lives in the ranch.
Right, her and maybe the bad guy, and
maybe Donna as well, because she has some stuff going on. It's not particularly interesting, but at least she's scamming some people over some Native American jewelry and then get killed. So
it could have been. There was a lot of potential here, I think.
It was,
and I can understand, being a writer, and this was out in 95, so the show hadn't been out that long, just 2 seasons. But, there's also the amount of time that goes through in the publishing world. So he probably wrote this, late 94 or to be generous, but probably more like closer to early 94, 93.
Yeah.
So he hadn't had much to work with, yet, and to really identify with the characters yet. So
the only thing is that it's after the abduction arc, because it talks about briefly there about the X-Files being closed by Skinner and reopened. But that's all you really got to go with, really. It's
this one was hard to pinpoint where it could fall in the show, really. So.
And I think that's the problem with the book, actually. They have random bits when Mulder talks, I must find some info, but in the meantime, I'll find the killer. And it's like, just trying to throw things, or the shadowy conspiracy of men, but it doesn't really, it's just kind of thrown in there to kind of, I guess, try and bring depth to the world of the X-Files. I mean, even Skinner doesn't really, I know you're obviously a huge Skinner fan, I know. But even then, I know it's kind of earlier days when he's still much more well, it's the early days. Season 11, he was still antagonistic, wasn't he? But that was a whole other thing. But I think he's very much like, he's the gruff aggressive. Oh, I know, I'm going to send you the case and do as you're told, and what's going to think about this case. And it's just, but again, there's nothing really there. I think even with the characters, I think you can tell that Grant it doesn't really get Scully's head at all. I don't think you really get Scully, and there's an attempt at humour in this, but it's all from Mulder's point of view. So he jokes to a witness, you probably don't pack as much for Hoddy as Scully does, and but it all comes across as a bit forced and a bit. There's not really enough to Scully. I think Scully doesn't really get to do much in this one, even though she's there with Mulder the whole time, because it's all kind of all in Mulder's head. But again, there's just not enough development of either character really. So it's very just kind of paint by numbers in terms of their motivations and then the kind of following the case through.
So how do you feel so we kind of started out with Mulder and Scully, we really didn't even get to Mulder and Scully till pretty far in, right? So
I mean, the best bit I like is actually stuff in Washington DC, because you've got this whole thing of Mulder being involved, helping these other agents on a case with this person spelling out their name on their murder victims, which for me, kind of the first time I read it, I thought, it almost reminds me of Twin Peaks when the victims had the killer's name on their fingernails, but not as interesting as that. But it was the idea of this whole ancient Greek name spelling out the killer's identity sort of thing. But and I quite like that, because I think the one thing the show never did enough was really establish that Mulder, before he worked in the X-Files, he was in behavioural science. He was studying profiling serial killers. And I think this bit, I think what Grant really does, what I like, at the beginning, he takes Mulder's skills and has him assisting the other agents on this case to try and find this killer. And obviously proves at the same time he's much more intuitive, much more intelligent, engaged than the others can hope to be. So he's always 2 steps ahead. And that was kind of interesting. And then that kind of just stops, and they go off in this case, and then get all hot and bothered in the desert and can't really cope with the heat, and just doesn't really go anywhere, does it?
Let's maybe talk about the characters on an individual basis. I know you just talked a little bit about Mulder, and we mentioned that Scully is not. We don't really get her point of view much, but did you feel like it was kind of true to the show, like their characters, or did you feel like they were off at all, or maybe could have been fleshed out a little bit more?
It's difficult because the book essentially is a case of the week. There's nothing big about it. There's nothing has any impact on the ongoing storyline. So in one sense, because it was always going to be a little bit paint by numbers to do just like the case of the week, but you don't really. I don't think it's not true to them at all. I think it just doesn't really do anything interesting with them. It's very much a paint by numbers. They go on the case. Scully does an autopsy. Mulder clues into the Native American culture, and it could be this Bloodwind, and goes down that investigative route. They get the local hick sheriff, who's a bit of a kind of cliche character himself, who basically is, you're talking rubbish, and Scully's debating Mulder, but it doesn't. But it's very paint by numbers. There's nothing really interesting about it. It's just Mulder and Scully on a case doing what they do, kind of fairly standard fare, really.
Yeah, and I felt kind of like there wasn't a lot of tension when there could have been. I mean, pretty much the only tension in the whole book came from Donna, who was, trying to get out of town, essentially, before the shit hit the fan, or the whirlwind hit, But, so, she knew this was coming, but then everything you expected to happen happened. There were no surprises. There were no real plot twists. So it kind of made for, I don't necessarily want to say boring, because there were a lot of interesting aspects to it. I thought, the whirlwind itself and the method of, these murders was really fascinating. Yeah. But, just on the whole, the characters were not, they were kind of one-dimensional, and there was not a lot of tension really to build up or to really keep. I mean, even though it was a quick read, it was not exactly the kind of quick that you want to keep turning pages. It was just like, oh, this is so easy. It's just
it was easy. It wasn't. I want to keep reading. It's like just the story's done kind of before it gets going. It's a very short book. I think it's quick. That there's a lot thrown in, but not much depth to it, so you can just get through it quite easily. But so it wasn't arduous. It wasn't boring, because you're right. The aspects, particularly the whole thing with the Whirlwind itself, was quite interesting. But it felt like it needed a few more drafts to really give some depth to some of these characters.
So how do you feel like Mulder and Scully really worked well as a team on this book or on this case? How did you feel about their dynamic?
It was fine. I think it did feel at times like, maybe because, as you said, because it would have been commissioned, written and published before it was released, it does feel a little bit more of the really early X-Files, but with this extra banter thrown in. Maybe he assumed that 2 seasons on there'd be more banter, so the banter itself feels quite forced between them sometimes, and some of the jokes Mulder makes, you think, doesn't really sound natural. And Scully's very much a little bit kind of hard-nosed. Like the scene very on the diner when she kind of criticises him for having fries. And it feels very much like someone doesn't really know him that well yet. So it does work. But again, I kind of felt the banter was thrown in just to add some spice to it, but didn't really work that well either.
Yeah. Well, I think the cool thing about having a novel is that you do get inside the character's head and, hear their thoughts, so to speak. And there just wasn't that much going on, I guess. Like, I wanted more from it. So, just on the show, you get to watch them and speculate about, what are they thinking, what's going through their mind, and you kind of wish that, as far as a novel goes, you get more of that, and there just wasn't. It was kind of just, I don't know, it kind of fell flat to me. I really wanted more what's Scully thinking, and what are they, I wanted more banter, but again, it was pretty early in the show, so he didn't really have a lot to work with, so.
Yeah. I think, what it felt to me almost like it was a novelization of a TV episode, in that you take the one and then you would kind of only get what you're given, but obviously he had so much more scope because it was a original story for a novel that he could have gone into their heads a lot more. And I say, you don't really get into what Scully's doing at all. She's there to support Mulder. There's a bit of banter, but there's nothing really to understand about Scully, and the Mulder stuff is just standard Mulder fare. Nothing more interesting than that.
Right, and there wasn't even very many. I was trying the whole time to look for stuff that I could quote, and there just really wasn't anything that was all that quotable. The only thing I wrote down was when they were investigating after one of the murders, Scully was talking about how it was like they were scoured to death. And Mulder says, so we're looking for a sentient Brillo, which was hilarious because, Mulder, but I mean, there really wasn't that many quotable lines that really stood out to me. Did you have any that you remember standing out to you, or? Nothing
really, no. It was, I think, the whole idea of the being scoured, that was the most interesting part of the book in general, so. But no, it all seemed just a bit fine. Nothing really jumped out at me.
Yeah, and I thought there was going to be, the way they set it up, I thought there was going to be a lot more with the Sheriff Sparrow, and I think it was Anna, and then there was one of the Native Americans.
There's Nick, Nick... the name's now actually from the book now. So there is
Lanaya.
Yeah, so there's the killer, and then there's Nick Lanaya, and then there's Chiolo or something as well. The other character,
yeah.
the one
Leon.
That is Leon Chiolo, Leon, who's the bad boy, but he's such a typical. That's it. I think the idea, Grant's thinking, let's play. They even mentioned in the book that it's kind of thrown off. It was all an act, and it's supposed to be. It's all very clever. Oh well, it wasn't Chiolo. It was Nick Lariana all along. But it was so obvious. Nick Chiolo. Right. I imagine that maybe if this had been an episode, performances may have brought something to it. But the whole deal of Leon is he's bad. But literally goes, I'm a son of a bitch, Agent Mulder. I kill people. I don't steal from people. I just kill them. And I was like, really? It's such a cliche character. I wonder, had that been on TV, it could have been this most dreadful performance, over cliche performance imaginable, unless I'd done something interesting with it. So, yeah, Leon Chiller, he's supposed to be this red herring the whole way through. He's this kind of deadly killer from the reservation who's got a chip on his shoulder and he's using Native American psychic powers to kill people with evil whirlwinds. But no, that doesn't really stick at all. And I think he doesn't really go anywhere. In the end, he just runs and hides. And that's it. And I think Nick Liana, the main character, maybe that's someone could if that had been on a TV episode, performance may have brought some depth to that. But you don't get anywhere near enough to his character. He's just this guy. You hear everyone talking about him, how he went away, got degrees, came back, is trying to bridge the gap between the reservation and the kind of modern world. But you never get it's all what you're told by other characters. You never get anything from himself to suggest kind of who he is as a person. So when you find out that he's the killer actually, and it doesn't make any sense. It does, but at the same time, it both doesn't make any sense, and you kind of go, huh, okay, well, it had to be someone, didn't it? So it doesn't really go anywhere. I think there's a cliche character, and he's the most pivotal character in a way. And you don't get enough of him. You don't go in his head. You don't get a sense of who he is. It feels like he needed another few chapters in his head just to get an understanding of who he was, so you could understand it. And maybe that's saying, had this been an episode, performance may have brought that role to life. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point you make, because the whole time I kind of felt like there was a lot of build-up and a lot of information from other characters about other characters.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like everything sort of came filtered through everyone else's perspective, but not so much from the personal point of view of any of the characters.
No.
So I think out of all of the characters, we got the most out of Donna, probably.
Yeah.
And there was a lot from Anna, but then nothing ever came of her. Like, I didn't really understand the point of Anna at all.
No, she wasn't. She was supposed to be this person.
Like, she found the bodies, but that was it. But there was so much, I felt like there was a lot of setup for her. Like, she was the shotgun on the wall, so to speak. But then nothing ever really paid off with her, except for there was one of the elders was in love with her or something. Like, are we supposed to think that, like, all this was because of her, for her? Or that's the impression I kind of felt like I was supposed to get, but it was really confusing, and nothing really kind of came out of that.
No, I think Annie Hatch is an interesting, a non-interesting character in a sense, because I can imagine had she been on the show, she would have played by this kind of very well actress and been a quite a presence on the episode. And in the book, she's the opening character. She's the one that discovers the body. You get more. In fact, you probably get more in her of her who she is in that first chapter than you get anyone else in the rest of the book. So it really does set her up as this kind of important character. And I think the twist later on that she actually was on the reservation, but she went up as a teenager, married a Hollywood exec, had a bit of a Hollywood career, and then settled down and won't go back. It's all this stuff that, it's all supposedly leading somewhere. I thought throughout the book that she was going to have the power to stop it. And actually, the reason she was there is because, particularly at the end, the most I say exciting part of the book, apart from maybe Donna's death as well, is Mulder and Scully trying to escape from the reservation as the bloodwind forms, and they run to Annie Hatch's house, and you kind of think, okay, maybe, and it's coming towards them, and it's all resolved fairly standard. Mulder eventually gets the pouch with the magical herbs or whatever it is and destroys it and but actually, I thought it was going to be more interesting than that. And actually, Annie Hatch was going to be, because obviously this is about psychic ability from this Native American culture, and because you found out quite late on this big twist that she was originally from the same tribe, I assumed she was then going to have the power to stop it. But no, she doesn't. She just hides in a kitchen when they run to a house and then offers them lemonade and they go. It's like
that would have been much more interesting, I think.
Yeah. All I remember her, apart from the opening chapter, is that she offers Mulder and Scully lemonade. It's like, well, what's more to it? And there's nothing more to it than that. It is so disappointing. I think I'm assuming Charles Grant had designed her, like probably the sheriff, and the other FBI agent Red, we talk about as well, as red herrings. They're all supposed to be. Is she so nice because she's evil and killing people? I don't know, and maybe that's what it was supposed to be. Maybe that I say twist. It wasn't much of a twist, was it? That the reveal that she was actually from the same tribe but hadn't been there for 50 years or whatever was supposed to be is Annie the killer? But you're not invested enough to really want to pursue that.
And what about the FBI agent you mentioned him, Garcon? Is that his name? He just kind of disappeared. Like, I don't even know what happened to him.
He's dead, I think, because they say Mulder says right there in the book, oh well, he'll probably turn up, but he won't be alive. Like, oh okay, but it's like he vanishes, and I think there's a reference right towards in the book that when Mulder says he probably went there a day ahead of us to reservation because he was on the same. I think the idea of Red is supposed to be is kind of he's not a traditional FBI agent, but in the same way that kind of Mulder is, and he's quite keen and intuitive. But that's kind of my assumption what piece to go because you never get into his head. You never see that follow through.
When I was going back trying to figure out what happened to him, I noticed in the conversation, and there's another character that comes up, Dr. Helen Rios was the medical examiner, and she said that Garcon knew the truth, and he was the only person who knew the truth about what she found out, which was that it wasn't... that these people, it was assumed that these people were flayed or had been, I guess, eaten by hawks or something. Like I don't know. But she had filed the real report first, and then it got covered up. But he was the only one who knew the truth. So maybe that's what happened to him. Like whoever was trying to cover the tracks got rid of him at the same time, or.
And I think that's it. I think Mulder's at the end. I think he mentions right towards the end that he went there. From the book now that he went there a day ahead. Yeah, I think he went there on his own. I think he found out before long, but he won't be alive. It's like, oh, okay, that's what Mulder says. So the idea is that he clued on just before Mulder and Scully did. Went to the reservation, found the killer, and was killed. But you don't see any of that, and he doesn't really go into any depth. They spend more time at the end of Scully being an angry driver on the freeway going back to the airport than you do focus on that. So it's
what was even the point of that character at all? If any, other than just to get Mulder and Scully out there, maybe, and that was it. I don't know.
You've got his random killings. You've got the local sheriff. You've got this Nick Lee and Anna, who's the kind of the local guide. You've got enough characters anyway, and Annie Hatch, I guess, as well, if you want to throw her in. There's enough people for Mulder and Scully to interact with without throwing in the other FBI agent too. So he is a completely redundant character to the plot. I think I kind of get the feeling that again maybe he's supposed to be a red herring. I don't know. Maybe that's what. Maybe there are so many characters because Charles Grant wants you to think, oh, could it be this person? Could it be this person? Could it be this person? I was not thinking that. I was waiting for it to happen. I didn't really care, to be honest. But I think I get the feeling that he had more ideas that. Again, if it was an episode, you'd almost imagine there were cut scenes. I don't know. And obviously, you appreciate with books, you write it and then you trim. And maybe he had more he trimmed for the novel. I don't know, but it does feel like he's just a character that doesn't go anywhere at all.
Yeah, that was frustrating because there were just so many things I felt that could have made it so much better than like it definitely could have benefited, I think, from some beta readers and a few, maybe one or two more revisions. But yeah, I mean, on a whole, how did you feel about the actual case? like the actual X-file of this, they call it the Sangre Viento, and I seriously apologize for that pronunciation.
We'll call it the Bloodwind. That's what it translates to.
The Bloodwind, yes. How did you feel about the actual case? Like, on a case X-file basis, was it a good X-file? Like, would this be one that you classify as creepy or scary or kind of in the middle, maybe?
Probably more to the middle. I think it's the best part of the book. It's the most interesting part of the book. The deaths themselves are really nasty, and I think that's the one area where I think Grant uses the kind of he doesn't need a budget. He doesn't need a TV budget to do what he wants to do, and this is what a book can do. A book can go further because no requirement of special effects or budget or anything else that we restrained by on television. And it is a really nasty, really evocative idea. And you get a sense later on when they see it, it's not really a tornado, but it's almost like this weird shape return 2 points going towards ripping up the ground and kind of flying into you. It's a really interesting idea. And I think while it's as an X-File generally, it's probably sit more in the middle. I think the deaths themselves are quite nasty. And it's an interesting, the idea of this psychic tornado, Bloodwind, killing people, and also killing people specifically. So it doesn't, there are some people get caught in the crossfire. There's a random thing with this local artist who's, I assume, truck gets hit by the Bloodwind but doesn't die. That's another random thing that goes on in the storyline. But it's the idea of this tornado that scours people and targets them as well is a really interesting idea, and that's kind of why I think that alone gives it a couple of stars. I think we'll give it 4 rather than 2 because of that, because it's really interesting. It's just a shame the execution around it and the actual storyline itself is just rather lackluster most of the time.
I can't decide how to feel about the murders leading up to Donna Faulkner's, because like they're essentially just written off as like they're trying to figure out how these victims are connected or if they're connected, or because the only thing that they have in common is their method of death. So, and then you've got the guy who gets run off the road, but was he killed? I don't think he was killed, right?
No, he was in hospital.
He was in the hospital. So then you've got all these, and then you get to Donna's death, and that's the one death that actually has a meaning, and the rest are literally written off. I think Mulder says they were just practice. What? That's insidious, but also like, how can you just write them off as just practice? Yeah.
I had this bit imagine this has been an Agatha Christie style murder when people get killed off one by one. And it's all targeted, but the method is this Bloodwind. That's a much stronger storyline already. I think, to throw them away as all they were essentially test subjects it's poor writing. It's really, really poor writing. I think it would be much more interesting if you'd had the brother was an eyewitness to Nick and his dealings, and maybe this random couple that Annie finds actually were threatening the reservation or involved, or understood that he had a double life. There was a connection, and they were being murdered to cover up something. It's already much more interesting, but because they're just tests, they're random. There's no real impact. It's kind of, I guess, it's sort of shock value.
Exactly.
Shock value, but it doesn't really go.
And it also lends more to, I think it would have ratcheted up the tension quite a bit when Donna knew that, she knew she was in trouble because she had, stolen money or whatever. But then, and she knew like, oh, these people are going to come after me. I got to get out of town. But she didn't really know anything about the Bloodwind either.
No.
So, because it was being all covered up. So then it would have made a lot more sense for her to have heard about these deaths and to have kind of that inside knowledge. I think it would have driven up the tension quite a bit more if, she knew that this horrible thing was coming for her and there was no way to stop it. Like, she kept trying to think, like, I'm going to outrun this storm, and she was going to get on the plane first, and that didn't work out, and then she didn't just drive out of town. But then, you know, like, in the way that she was killed, where she kind of, like, thought she heard the water running or something, went outside to check, like, she's literally preparing to leave everything behind, get a new identity. What's she going to care about a water bill for?
Oh, I don't know. It's a bit random.
Like, what even? So that really kind of made me like, oh, I rolled my eyes at that a little bit. But, I mean, it's just crazy pants.
What do you think of the kind of the final scene when Mulder and Scully realize they're trapped in the reservation and have to escape?
I liked that scene a lot because it was really, like, you really felt like they were, you know, plodding across the desert, and they were, you know, you could just really feel like how dry it was and how they just needed to trudge just a little bit farther, and you know, that was really intense. And they, you know, they could see the storm coming, and they knew that what it would do, and that was really terrifying because they had seen the results of what happens when, you know, these victims get, like, that was pretty intense. So I really liked that. That was probably my favorite part of the book, really.
Yeah, same for me as well.
So, yeah.
I think the only thing I think it's number one on TV would be quite a very tense final 5 minutes as well, because you imagine, particularly the idea of running across the desert and across the rickety bridge, and then seeing them coming right into the house. There's a lot of good tension there, and then obviously you got Nick trying to run them down in the car, herd them in towards the direction of the Bloodwind. That's quite good as well. I mean, the only nitpick I've got there is it takes a very, very long time. Really, he should have summoned the Bloodwind and they should have died. But obviously what they were going to. But the fact they managed, I imagine the distance between the reservation and Annie Hatcher's house is probably a good few miles. So the fact that they managed to get almost the house before the Bloodwind gets towards them is seems a little bit drawn out compared to, say, for example, Donna's death. But it's a small thing, really, because it is a good scene, like a good sequence.
Yeah, definitely. And that was pretty intense. And then, you know, they get to the house. And it's kind of funny because when I was reading this, there's a new Netflix show that I had watched, Extreme Houses, I think it's called. I can't remember the name exactly. But the episode that I watched was a desert home. Right. And so the whole time I was reading, I was imagining that house out in the middle of this desert. And that was kind of cool. But, yeah, I was imagining this, like, beautiful desert home where Annie lived with her they're not servants but workers, and
probably slightly cliched servants, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And like they are like supposed to be looking out for her and stuff like that, but then she rides off into the desert alone, and it's like, I don't know. I think it could have been cleaned up quite a bit, but
yeah.
What are you going to do?
I think we should rewrite it, obviously, because we've got much better ideas already than Charles Wright did, unfortunately.
Yeah, so overall, like, it was a really good concept. Yeah. It just, you know, the execution could have probably come off quite a bit more solid, I suppose.
I agree.
Yeah. So, do you have any other thoughts on the book? Or anything else you'd like to add? Any favorite quotes? Or
I don't know. I've read it twice now, and I think I'm not going to read it again. So I think it's okay. It's really interesting idea, just very lackluster in its execution. So I think I think it's a one to read if you're curious about expanding your exposure to the X-Files and reading some of the novels too, but I think otherwise I'd probably stick with the show.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's worth reading once and then just so you know what happens. So, yeah, and then kind of probably forget about it like I did over the years. But, I mean, it's worth picking up now and then, I think. But it's not going to be one for the legends, I suppose. So, like, since we've talked about it at all, has your rating changed? Would you adjust it, or are you just gonna stick with like a solid 4?
I think we'll stick with 4, but a lot of that is based on the idea of the Bloodwind itself. I think Bloodwind, and I think Grant's very, very good at setting the atmosphere of the place. You feel the heat and the exhaustion of the town they're in. So I think it gets kind of points there really. But I think maybe 4 zeros, maybe a 3.5.
So like a 6 for the setting.
Yeah.
And then as far as like the writing craft,
2.
Like a 4, yeah. And like the plot and the characters are
the plot characters are 1. I think.
Yeah.
I think the writing's a 2 because it's quite atmospheric. The idea is 6, and the actual storyline and characters are all 1. So yeah, we'll cover at even 3.5.
There you go. It all evens out. Average is a 4. Yeah. Well, I don't really have anything else to add unless you do, but I think we've pretty much covered it. I think we have. It's not exactly one to be able to get super in-depth about, unfortunately. So, we won't try to drag it out more than we need to, right, Baz?
No, I don't think we need to.
Great. Well, Baz, thank you so much for talking with me about this book, and thank you for reading it. Where can we find you online if we need to get in touch with you?
Okay, so on Twitter, I'm at Baz Greenland. I also have a writer's page, Baz Greenland Writer. I also write for Set the Tape, which Tony runs, and I also am the TV editor for the Digital Fix, where I've also done a lot of content around the X-Files as well. I've covered a lot of the episodes, new and old, for the site as well.
That sounds great. Well, I'm Sarah Blair. You can find me on Twitter, and Sarah, SARAHL BLAIR. And yeah, so I wrote my own book. It's kind of X-Files-ish, Darkness Shifting. You can find that on Amazon. So, I love to read and write. But and find us on the X-Files Basement on Facebook. We've kind of talked a little bit about the book over there, but not much. I don't think many people have read it at the time of this recording. So we would love to hear your thoughts on the book after you read it and listen to this episode. We can have a little bit more of a discussion about it and see if you guys...
I'm certain now we discussed it, everyone's going to go out and read it now.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's totally worth, we'll have to just trick them into reading it first and then listening to the podcast. So, spoiler alert. It's a little bit late for that, right? Awesome. Well, Baz, thank you so much. And we hope you guys will read and listen and let us know what you think. So, until next time, folks, trust no one.
The Xcast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and presented by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated group of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find us on Twitter at The Xcast, and on Facebook if you type in The Xcast, or at our group X-Files Basement, an Xcast podcast fan group, where you can continue the discussion about all things Mulder and Scully. If you want to support The Xcast further, you can now subscribe and become a patron of the show on Patreon. On Google, just type patreon.com/The Xcast. That's PATREON. You'll see all of our tiers, subscription options and perks, which include early access to episodes, bonus content such as commentaries on X-Files episodes, access to a patron chat zone, and even appearing on one of our patron roundtable discussions. We would appreciate any support you can give the show, so just go to patreon.com/The Xcast to find out more. Our title music is provided courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.